Praising God for giving us another chance to appreciate this time the fact that He is tough, but He is fair. And praying that as we look at the Lamentations, we take these as cautions not to see, as we are in hurricane season now in part of the country, the dirty side or the ugly side of His fairness. God willing, we will be able to look at Lamentations chapter 4 that we want to call, What Will You Do When You Realize the Cost? A healthy caution as to counting the cost before we go into any endeavor, good or bad. In this chapter that begins with the first 5 verses or so, giving us another perspective on the national decline, where they are relative to where they were. Verse 1 saying how the gold has grown dim and the stones are scattered, talking about the decline of the things. Verse 2, likening the precious sons of Zion to gold that is now regarded as common earthenware. It's more tragic, though it seems, in verse 3, as it's going to talk about the way that their mothers or the mothers of the children, once kind, have grown cold even to their own kids because of the condition of Judah. As verse 4 goes on to talk about the way that the kids are struggling, they are begging, and even beyond their mothers, no one is giving to even the children. As it's going to talk about in verse 5, the collective decline that seems to create this kind of environment where those who once feasted on delicacies now perish in the streets, and those who donned purple or had nice gear now embrace ash heaps. Verse 6 saying, the chastisement of Judah is greater than that, or it seems to be greater than the punishment of Sodom, who when they were thrown down, nobody was hand-wringing for them, seeming to make it clear that nobody, I can't say nobody cared, but it didn't seem to strike a deep emotional chord with those who saw Sodom's punishment, and maybe likewise Judah's. Verses 7 and 8 describing the decline in their nobles in terms that are somewhat controversial. I'll stay away from them, but I won't duck them. If you want a larger conversation on them, hit me up in the comment section or just reach out to me directly and we can talk about them in more detail. But it's a conversation that deserves more than a 5-minute segment. Anyway, verse 9 is going to go on to talk about the condition is such where those who were victims of the sword are happier than those who are victims of the hunger that has set in. Verse 10 going on to talk once again about the mothers, saying how the compassionate women have boiled their own children in the destruction that they are now facing. Saying in verse 11, God has given full vent to His wrath in a way that, in verse 12, not even the kings of earth believed was possible, meaning that no matter how much they might not have liked Jerusalem, it seemed unassailable. Verse 13 going on to say that this was for the sin of their prophets and priests who shed the blood of the righteous, once again seeming to think that it would never come into account, or their wrongs would never come into account. However, they are now experiencing a situation in which they find themselves as fugitives. That is, those who are lucky enough to be survivors, seeming to find only temporary places of rest as they have become outcasts, even to the places where they have been driven. That goes through, I think, verse 15, where verse 16 will pick up once again, helping us to understand that this is no accident. The Lord Himself has scattered them, as verses 16 through roughly 20 are going to describe the way in which no one even shows honor to their priests and their elders, understanding that all Judah has fallen under the condemnation and they are being dogged by their enemies. Verse 18, their pursuers are overtaking them in verse 19, and they are being captured or falling into the snares or their pits in verse 20. Saying once again, as these lamentations often enough end up in verses 21 through 22, feel free to rejoice now, specifically directing that at Edom. You can laugh at what's going on to Judah and Jerusalem now, but to you also, this cup shall pass. Verse 22, concluding the chapter by saying, the punishment for your iniquity, O daughter of Zion, is accomplished. He will keep you in exile no longer, but your iniquity, O daughter of Edom, He will punish. He will uncover your sins. The cost that caught my attention quite possibly might have been the internal cost and the external cost of Hearts that have grown cold, reminiscent of something we're going to see again when Jesus is describing the end of all things, or what seems to be the end of all things in Matthew 24, saying, because lawlessness increases, the hearts of many will grow cold, quite possibly pointing back to some things we see in this lament as we see the degree to which the stress and the pain and suffering in Judah is such that the mothers' hearts have even grown cold toward their own children. That's the internal cost. But externally, Judah was a place where not everyone, but most seemed to have gotten away with doing wrong for so long that when wrong started happening to them, it seems that no one cared. Going back to some things we seem to see in the very first chapter of Lamentations, where they seem to fail at counting the cost of lacking integrity. A character trait that once again can seem super square until your money, your power, and your clout run out.